I'm excited to introduce entrepreneur, Forbes writer, podcaster, and now filmmaker Jia Rizvi to talk about her award-winning debut film, Conviction, a documentary about Jeffrey Deskovic, a 16-year-old who was convicted of the rape and murder of Angela Correa, a 15-year-old high school classmate. Welcome to the show, Jia.
Thank you so much for having me.
Boy, when I watched the film, I'm excited to dive into this later when I have some more questions about the filming and also the story, how you found him and wanted to do this film. But first, I wanted to kind of start with, where did your fascination with the American criminal justice system begin?
The funny thing is, it started when I was really young. I was maybe 19 or something, and I ended up reading a book called The 16th Round by Reuben Carter. And if you're familiar with that story, it became the film The Hurricane, which Denzel Washington starred in back in 2000 or something like that. And it's such a great film, and it's such a great book. And Reuben Carter was a famous boxer in New Jersey, and he got wrongfully convicted. And when I read it, I was just, at the time, super young and shocked because I thought the cops were always the good guys. And, my little experience with police was I get pulled over for a speeding ticket, they'd let me go. I was like, oh, they're fine. And then I read this book and watched this film, and Reuben Carter was a celebrity, and he got wrongfully convicted. And that kind of just shook me at my core because I thought, if this can happen to a famous person, then who can it not happen to? And that was bizarre to me and just stuck with me in the back of my mind. And then fast forward to, I think it was 2014 or 2015, the Serial podcast came out at season 1. And I listened to that, and that tells a story of Adnan Syed, and he was wrongfully convicted of a murder. And it all kind of came back to me, what I had read in Reuben Carter's book. And I was like, wow, this is 20-something years later, and it's still the same story. And I was incensed and fascinated by how could this be happening to innocent people. And so I felt really bad for Adnan because he reminded me of my brothers. He was very similar to my brother in every way. I have 2 brothers, and his upbringing and everything was very similar to mine. And so I got fascinated with that, as the rest of the world, as you know, did.
Yeah.
But right, it just took on a life of its own, that story. But in the very early stages, before it kind of blew up, I organized the very first fundraiser for Adnan Syed's Legal Defense Fund, because I thought, everyone's entertained, but this guy's sitting in prison, and what could we do for him to help him? And so I used to work in the fashion industry. All I knew was that. And so I created these free Adnan shirts and hosted this fundraiser in New York. And the shirts went viral all over the world. It was crazy. We were selling so many of them, it was hard for me to package them in my apartment and ship them out. So we donated all of the money from the shirts and from the fundraiser event. And at the time, now, of course, they've gotten so many donations, but at the time, it was the largest donation made. And so the family ended up reaching out, and, they're like, where'd this money come from? And, what, thank you so much, kind of thing. And as a result, now, this was back, almost 9 years ago. As a result, I've become really close friends with them. They're wonderful people. So when Adnan had his post-conviction hearing in 2016, I went to the hearing, and I was sitting in the courtroom, and I saw a lot of corruption, right in front of my eyes. And that's what really triggered the passion for this. And when I was organizing the fundraiser, a friend of mine said, I want to introduce you to somebody who'd be a great speaker for the fundraiser. And she introduced me to a guy named Jeff Deskovic. And he had a very, very eerily similar story to Adnan. He was also convicted of murdering a fellow classmate. And he spoke at the fundraiser, and that's how I met him.
I just feel like you were just sharing with the legal system, I think there's a lot of work that still needs to be done, because I think that people are wrongly accused all the time and coerced into making guilty pleas for lesser sentences, even though they didn't do it, just to move it along. And I think that's awful. You wonder, if they pleaded innocent, maybe they would have gotten off without, never going to jail. So, and when I heard Jeffrey's story and through your film, it just saddens me, because you really don't know the implications of when somebody is going to jail for 16 years. That was all of his 20s. He was in jail, to come back and then try to have a normal life and date. When somebody's asking, what did you do in your 20s? Oh, well, I was getting beaten up. I was in jail for something I didn't do. And then how does somebody understand that? Because I think that there's a stigma, which I was going to talk about later. But why don't we just, that was just kind of my thoughts going into this. and watching your film. What made you decide, hey, let's record this. Let's do a film on this, on your story, Jeffrey?
Jeff was the only person that I knew personally who had this lived experience. Of course, I had met Adnan's family, but never met Adnan. So Jeff was the only person I knew at the time. So when I went to Adnan's post-conviction hearing, it was in Baltimore, and it's a 3-hour train ride between New York and Baltimore. And I had watched the prosecutor really be corrupt, in the courtroom. Adnan had an alibi witness that was testifying for the very first time, decades after the incident had occurred, the murder had occurred. And so this was an opportunity for him to possibly get out, or, time served, or an exoneration or something. And this prosecutor was doing everything he could to discredit the alibi witness. And so as I watched that, all I could think is that he's not looking for the truth. He's looking to win. He doesn't care that there's a woman sitting here who said, I was with him at the time of the murder. We were in a library. We were together. I have physical proof. I saved paperwork from decades ago that I've had at my house. He didn't care about any of that. And so I couldn't believe that that was our justice system, first of all. I just couldn't believe that's how it works, and nobody's allowed to say anything, and the prosecutor's allowed to lie, but God forbid we lie on the stand, and that's against the law. And so it was so infuriating. My blood was boiling. And so when I left that, I think it was a 5-day court hearing. When I left there, I was on the train ride back to New York, and I was like, I started to realize the fundraiser I had, while it raised thousands of dollars, it was not enough to even help Adnan, let alone, the hundreds of thousands of other people that are in Adnan's shoes, And so, not very naively, I had just watched Making a Murder and The Jinx, which were huge back then. And I thought, millions of people watch those shows.
Yes.
Millions of people love those shows. I'm just going to make movies. That's how I'm going to get more eyeballs. That's how I'm going to get people to care. When we had organized Adnan's fundraiser, I didn't know anything about fundraising. And so we were literally on the ground, me and my one friend, by Columbia University, up and down the streets, handing out flyers, trying to get people to talk to us, telling people like, this guy is innocent and he's stuck in prison. And people didn't care. We were annoying them. They didn't want to be stopped on the street. We even went to try to go to the law departments within the universities because we thought maybe they would care more. And everything was just like red tape, red tape, red tape. And so I thought films would be a better way to get through to people to help this cause. And thank God I didn't know anything about filmmaking. I knew not a single thing about filmmaking. And so I was completely blind and completely naive. And I came back to New York, promptly Googled a few film schools, found New York Film Academy, enrolled into New York Film Academy, and just started filming when I got to the school. And when I got there, because I really knew what I wanted to do, I wanted to shed light on wrongful convictions. So every assignment they gave us during the classes, I made sure I filmed stuff that would relate to the police, the courtrooms, anything that I could use as B-roll in the future, because I knew I had a goal in mind. And Jeff was the only person that I knew in real life who had went through this experience. And so I called him and I said, hey, would you be open to me filming you and, possibly making a documentary about you or like a short or something? And he said, yeah, sure. And so I started filming Jeff while I was at New York Film Academy. And what ended up happening is our final project at school was to make a 10-minute or shorter doc. I think it was 8 minutes or something. And so I made a story about, almost the same story you've seen on Jeff. And when I was sitting in the final class, in the editing class, a professor was coming around to watch everybody's films, to critique it and tell us what we could do better, what we should change. So he watched it, and it was like 8 to 10 minutes, and he watched it and didn't give me a single edit and just said, wow, this is great. He's like, you need to submit this to film festivals. And I responded and said, I don't know what a film festival is. He was like, okay, there's an evening masterclass on film festivals. You need to enroll. And so I enrolled in that, learned how to submitted it. Well, actually, I finished school, continued to work on it, made it into a 20-minute film because I had a lot of footage that I wasn't able to use because I had to fit within the parameters of the school assignment at the time. So then I expanded it to a 20-minute doc, submitted that to film festivals. And it ended up getting into 17 film festivals, and it won 6 awards, and it just kind of took on a life of its own. And that's what made me realize that, this is something I can do. And I switched careers to just start doing that full time.
Wow, what a commitment to go to film school just to make a film. That's a lot of money too, isn't it?
It's less money than the camera equipment, hiring the crews, because I got to use all the equipment that the school had, and I got to work with the students, and they were the crew, and so it was a lot less money. And I will say, I just took a workshop. It was only a 2-month workshop. It was not a 4-year program either, but it was very convenient because we had access to everything we needed then.
That's awesome. So what cameras did you use, and how many?
I started, we used 3. I started with a Canon 5D Mark III and 2 of those. And then I purchased the Blackmagic cinema camera. And so we ended up using those 3.
Okay. And then what did you edit on?
On Adobe Premiere.
Okay, great. Yeah, it's always interesting what everybody uses to do their filmmaking and their cameras. And it really is a testament that you can use a lot of, you don't really have to have the high-end gear to make a film and make it look good, so.
And you really don't. It's so interesting because when I was in school, they showed us scenes from big films that are out there that used even iPhones for certain shots and B-roll and whatnot. And our professor said the best camera is the one you actually have. And the most important thing is that you tell a compelling story and not what you filmed it on.
Right. Yeah, I totally agree. So when you went into filming this, what was your approach in the narrative? Like, how did you want to go about the interview? I mean, did you talk to him ahead of time? Can you just kind of walk me through the process of your filming? Did you interview him before, then you shot him, you had a couple locations? How did you approach it?
So what's funny is at first, because I didn't really expect this to become a film that would be on Amazon, so I didn't think these things through that much. I just went to his house and started filming the first day. For sure. I never did any pre-interviews, and I still to this day don't do any pre-interviews. I really find that the first time somebody shares their story, it's so raw and it's so honest that anytime I speak to them beforehand, I'm doing myself a disservice because the second time they tell it, it's never the same way and it's never with the same kind of passion because that person knows you already know the story. So they don't tell you it in the same way. So I never did any pre-interviews. I did know about Jeff's story from him speaking at my fundraiser for Adnan, but that was it. And so we just showed up at his house, set up the cameras, started rolling, and I asked him a bunch of questions. And it was just such a wonderful interview. That day, I'll never forget that day because it was my first day filming during school, and it was the first interview with Jeff I'd ever done. And I remember thinking so clearly, this is exactly what I'm meant to do. Like, I'm in the right place at the right time. It was so overwhelming in my mind. And Jeff is a fascinating subject because he's so open. He will share anything. And he says things, it's very interesting to me because he says things in such a matter-of-fact way, almost as if he's speaking about somebody else. And he'll say things that a lot of people wouldn't be able to speak about, but he'll say them like me and you were just chatting over lunch about how our day was. He'll just say them very fluently, easily. And I really appreciate that about him. It makes him such a great interview because almost nothing is off limits.
How long did it take you to shoot the whole film with everything?
So I shot for about 6 months initially. And I don't know if you know this, but so the short called Conviction is out on Amazon. Then I went on to shoot for another, it ended up being 2 years because of COVID. If it wasn't for COVID and we didn't have that year and a half break, it would have been just been another 6 months or so. But we went on to shoot for almost another 2 years and made a feature film. It's called 16 Years. And it's on Jeff's story as well. And my agent is currently in talks with streaming platforms to get that one to come out later this year, hopefully. So that one took a couple years. But the one on Amazon called Conviction was about 6 months, start to finish.
Okay, so the 16 Years hasn't aired yet?
Hasn't aired yet.
Okay.
No.
And it's complete, ready to go?
Yep.
Oh, wow. And how long did that, I mean, is that like an hour and a half? How long is that film?
Yep, it's 90 minutes, an hour and a half.
Okay. Wow. Oh, I can't wait to see that because I felt like Conviction just dived in, like really piecing a lot of it together pretty quickly to get the story. But there was so many more questions that I had that I would have wanted to go into. So I'm glad that you made it a feature film.
Yes, I felt the same way, that the short, we could only really focus on one aspect of it because it's a short and it's
Right.
such a robust story. You can't cram it all in there. So we focused on just reintegration, what it's like for an innocent person to spend that time, their formative years in prison. And when they get out, what is life like for them? That's really all Conviction gets into. Of course, it tells Jeff's story, but in a very condensed version. And that's when I finished that film, I felt very much how you're saying you felt, that there was so much more we didn't answer, so many questions about. He gave a false confession. How did that come to be? There was DNA evidence. Why wasn't it retested? If who really did it? There was just too many things left out. So the feature film dives into all of that and really focuses on the justice system and other people too. And how does this occur over and over? And how do people get stuck in this? And why are there not more, safeties in place for people innocent people not to get stuck in our justice system? So it's much more holistic.
Right. Oh, that's great. And I was kind of curious because in the film you went around the jail but not in the jail, and he's now a lawyer. So I was wanting to see like his interaction with somebody in the jail. Was there a lot of red tape that you couldn't get in there? And then is it in the feature?
You would not believe how much red tape. I mean, it was craziness. I'll tell you a funny story after I answer your question. They would not let us into the prison at all. We tried and tried, and that actually stalled the project for an entire year because we were just trying to get into the prisons to film inside. There's so much red tape, and then on top of it, it was during COVID. And so not only were we not allowed inside, families weren't allowed to visit. Nobody was allowed. So they were especially not letting anyone else in. They were like, families can't even come see their loved ones right now. There's no way journalists or filmmakers are getting in right now. And so we absolutely could not. They would not let us at all. I finally got permission to film outside the prison, and that took a year, and that was difficult enough. And the first day I got there, they tried to kick me off the premises, and they said the guard just wasn't aware that we had the permission. And so they tried to kick us off. We did get kicked off, and then we had to come back again, even though we had permission that time. Another time, we just drove, I won't say who, but we just drove onto prison grounds at a different prison. And I just whipped my camera out the window and just filmed what I could. And we got chased out of there by the guards. Like, they got in their car and chased us off of their property and stopped us. And, I threw my camera under my seat and just said we were lost. I said, we were just lost. I'm sorry, we ventured onto your property. And I just hit it. And my son was only 2 at the time, and he was in the back seat. And so that helped me probably look credible enough to not get in trouble. But yeah, we had to do all kinds of things to get those shots.
Wow. Now, in the film, could you get in and shoot anything in the feature? Were you able to?
No, because everything we shot was over that same period. It was during COVID. So everything you see in the short, the entire 20 minutes is in the feature. But of course, then it's expanded another, 70 minutes more. But it was all filmed at the same time. So all the challenges we had were the same for both films.
Got it. Did anything strike you when you were interviewing Jeffrey that you thought about later, like kind of thought about afterwards that you didn't know or just lingered? And I'm going to say what lingered for me. And that is the dating stigma. That when somebody like, Jeffrey at 17 years old is in jail all of his 20s for 16 years into his early 30s, he gets out and he was talking about that. I never thought about that. I never thought about, boy, now you're back in your life. You're out, you're free, you didn't do it. But then when you meet people, you have to tell them that. And then the stigmatism of being in jail, regardless if you did it or not. And then how do you have a normal kind of life like that?
Yeah, 2 things. That definitely, for me too, exactly what you said. And it was a very interesting vantage point for me because the very first day that I went to Jeff's house, the same day I was telling you about, when I took a crew with me, they were all students. They were much younger than me, the students, they were like 18, 19, 20-year-old women, And so I myself, before I got to Jeff's house, had this thought, the same thought that Jeff said people have about him, which I have so much guilt over, by the way. But I had the same thought, is this a safe environment for me to be taking these girls into? I had that thought. And then in that very same interview, when I interviewed Jeff, he made that comment about having that. And I never voiced this to anybody. I never said it out loud. It was just a thought in my mind. But I had so much guilt about having that thought once I saw him. And, at one point he did break down and he needed to pause. And, I think he was trying not to cry. And I felt so guilty for thinking the same thing that he said everybody thinks about him. But I couldn't help it because I was also feeling like, well, I'm taking these 20-year-old kids, who this is like their first time filming anything into someone's house. And I'm responsible for making sure it's a safe environment for them. I'm asking them to go there. And so I had that thought too. And I've always felt so guilty about having that thought. So that stuck with me for sure. The other thing is, as I watched Jeff, it was very apparent that he had a lot of after effects of growing up in prison. Little things would happen. Like the very first time I was ever in his office, we were talking with his whole team and the phone rang. And he got visibly agitated and stopped talking. And he was annoyed. And he told everybody, like, can somebody make that stop? And like, he was agitated. And I, have never been around anyone who would serve time in prison. I didn't understand what was happening. I was like, we were in a meeting, we're all talking, it's an office, the phone's going to ring. And so to me, I was like, why is this happening? It made no sense. And then as I got to know him, I got to see it's all loud noises. It was when somebody would honk their horn on the streets of New York. It was if a phone all of a sudden rang. And as I got to know him better and better, he told me any time in prison that you heard a loud noise, it's because it was danger. And so my mind is just programmed to think there's some danger because there was a loud noise. And it's heartbreaking. It's really, really heartbreaking. But the good thing I'll tell you is I've seen, now that I've known him for almost 10 years or 9 years, he has so many fewer after effects today than he did when I first met him. And so he's really adapting, to the real world, and which is nice to see. But in the beginning, it was very apparent, and there was a lot of after effects for sure.
Well, yeah, PTSD. Oh my God, I can't even imagine. And especially because he's 17, he's so young. Do you know?
Yes.
I mean, he alluded to some of the abuse. I mean, he didn't go into a lot of detail, but I mean, you can only imagine what probably happened to him on a daily basis.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
You go ahead.
No, it just breaks my heart that somebody that it's just you're putting somebody in a worse situation.
Yes, I purposely didn't ask Jeff about this because I'm very aware that the work I do, while I mean it to be for the good, it can also not be. It can re-traumatize somebody. So I walk this fine line, and I try really hard never to cross that line. So I have never asked him specifically about the other abuse. I do know from reading about him that there was. And the only time that he's shared with me was one time somebody hit him over the head with a 10-pound weight plate, and he could have died. And that's the one thing he shared with me, but I know that there was a lot more than that.
Yeah, I just don't even know how, people that go to war or jail come back, or sexual abuse, in a home, not even, from your family, and then you have to come back and act like it. I see where people could go into drug and alcoholism to numb it out,
Oh, absolutely. You have to walk around every day with whatever after effects you have from that experience and act like those things don't exist. Yeah, for sure. And navigate every day and other scenarios that trigger those things and just gut through them like they don't, have those effects on you, for sure.
Right.
For sure. Yeah.
And then after he got out, he became a lawyer. He went to law school to help other men who were wrongly accused. Talk about purpose. I hate to say that sometimes when these traumatic things happen to you, it creates a purpose for you later, like doing the work that he's doing now that he wouldn't have done had he not gone to jail. So maybe the silver lining is now he's helping other people that don't have a voice, or nobody cares, or nobody wants to help.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think it's in the short. Now I get confused sometimes what's in the short and what's in the
Yeah.
feature, but I think it's in the short that he says that. He says, at least I have a purpose in life. And, even though he went through this horrific experience, he now knows exactly what his life purpose is. And many people don't. So
Right.
there is, you're right, there is that. It's a big price to pay to find your life's purpose, but for sure. And that's the great thing about him. Even before he became a lawyer, just through starting a nonprofit organization, and it's called the Jeffrey Deskovic Foundation for Justice, I believe. He'd already freed, I think, like 7 or 8 people before even becoming a lawyer, which is just remarkable.
Yeah. I mean, what an amazing man, and what an amazing story. And I'm just, thank you so much for allowing me to see it. Because I didn't know about the story at all. And, it's just, I'm just fascinated with, I love true crime too. I just saw, it's just funny that just recently, just yesterday, I saw the special on the HBO. This is a little different, but it's the Kevin Spacey story about his abusing other people, and then and then getting away with it, and all these 8 men come up to say he did it, and then he gets away with it. And so you have the other side too, all the people that, because they're in high positions of power, they get away with doing god-awful things, whereas innocent people are going to jail for things they didn't do. It's just such a I don't know. It's injustice.
It's a broken system in a lot of ways. That's exactly it. Yeah, that's exactly it. I haven't seen that one yet, but it's on my list to watch.
It's good. It's sad. It's hard to watch sometimes, when you see somebody that you really respected or thought was so great, and hearing these men's stories, it's just sad, where you look up to somebody and then you have this happen. But what was kind of nice about it, what I wanted to say, is that the men were saying the exact same thing that women say when they're getting, abused, is when it's happening, you think you would punch the person, but you don't. You are so shocked it's happening that you don't even know what to do. So, and I'm sure, like, with Jeffrey being in jail and having these things happen, I mean, he must have felt so powerless. I mean, what are you going to do? I mean, and every day fearing your life. It must have been very scary for him.
In the feature, he said this one thing that really stuck with me. He said the first day, he's 17, in a max security adult prison. And so the very first day, then they drove him into there, and they said, do you want to go into Gen Pop, or do you want to go into solitary? And he said, what does that mean? Because he didn't know. And they said, well, Gen Pop, you're going to be with everybody, and here, we can put people that we think might be in danger. And imagine being a 17-year-old, first of all, and trying to make sense of this, and having to make this decision and making sense of what they're saying. And he said that it was, in the moment, he thought, this whole scenario is bad enough, and I'm not going to make it worse by putting myself in solitary confinement. So I'm just going to go into Gen Pop and deal with what I can deal with, because the whole thing is terrible enough as it is. And it's beyond heartbreaking. I can't even imagine having to make that decision at 17 and knowing the dangers of going into Gen Pop, first of all, and still choosing to do so because it's more terrifying to be locked up in a dark hole by yourself forever. It's horrific.
I think they're both bad, just different. I mean, you're going to go crazy, probably being alone for that long.
Yeah. He was in solitary confinement for 28 days one time when the person hit him in the head with the 10-pound weight plate, because he actually, no, somebody was trying to attack him and he attacked them first, I think is what happened. Anyways, he got put in solitary confinement, and he said, you don't even know what time of day it is. It's just, you don't know morning from night or anything. He said the only way he would be able to tell what time of day it was is if breakfast was served on the tray, then he would know it must be morning time. But I mean, it would drive anybody crazy.
Right. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Any other things that I didn't hit on the film that you might want to share?
There was one moment in that will be etched in my brain forever when we were filming the feature film, where and it's in the film. And Jeff really broke down. He had like a mental break in the middle of an interview. And I was devastated because I thought, for the first time, I thought, I'm not doing good work. This is not helping people. This is re-traumatizing him. And, we got through it, and it was a very emotional 20 minutes or so. My cameraman was crying. It was really rough and tough. And at the end of it, I said to Jeff, I said, we can just throw this all out. None of this interview has to ever see the light of day. I'll never put it in the film. Don't worry about it. And he said to me, I'll never forget this. And he said, no. He's like, I want you to absolutely put this in the film. He said, if people don't see what they did to me, then what was it all for? He said, he's like, it has to be in the film. And it is in the film. It's towards the end of the film. And it's really tough to watch. But he asked me to put it in there. And it's very, very compelling, but also very, very sad. And it was the one time in my career since I switched careers that I questioned if I'm doing the wrong thing or the right thing.
But don't you think that it is about telling the story? And I guess I just feel like I feel bad for men because they don't think that they can cry, or they should, or they have to be strong all the time. Especially, like, I'll just go back to the Kevin Spacey. I mean, one guy choked up and he started to cry and he had to excuse himself. And I thought, wow, I mean, but this is the moment. Why are we excusing ourselves? Shouldn't we be really sharing that this is, I know it's really vulnerable. I guess, like, oh, Tammy, do you want to cry in front of a bunch of people too? I get it. But also I think that I want us, the world, to be desensitized to that. It's okay to see men cry. Everybody cries,
Yeah, I know.
Share your feelings.
Men already have that stigma where they can't, like, mental wellness is not really top priority for them a lot of time, and that they don't cry. But I will say I have that too. I would never cry in public. It just feels like you shouldn't, even though people are more drawn to people who are authentically themselves, and you really should just do whatever it is that you're feeling. But I never do that either, so I completely understand it, just like you said.
Yeah, it is kind of a tough one. But it's so impactful when you see that. Just like you probably felt when you saw it too, is like, wow, you're really touching our hearts right now.
Yes, absolutely. It was the most impactful thing I've ever, witnessed or been a part of, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I love it when I see a movie and I'm crying in the movie, of course, alone in my room, but that you're really, you feel the pain of that person. I really commend you for doing this film and putting a story out there, because, nobody will know it unless we start having more films about what's happening out there, and everybody's human story and the resilience of the story.
That's so kind of you to say, and it makes me happy to hear. And I can't wait for you to see the feature. I'd love to hear what you think of it.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, and was it hard coming up with the questions? Did you have a set of questions that you had in mind when you were interviewing him, or did you feel like, okay, I'm just going to go into it and I'm just going to ask what I think and then flow with what comes up for me?
I'm a real type A planner type person. So I went in with for each interview, I only went in about 7 to 10 questions that I had pre-prepared. And then the rest of it, depending on what he said to me, led me to whatever other questions came about. So I just went in with kind of an outline of in chronological order of his story and the things that I wanted to ask him. And then from there, it was just all candid conversation.
Mm-hmm. I'm just curious, because you did talk about that, sometimes you don't want to reignite the trauma. You got to be careful about the questions, but that's part of the story. So do you mind talking to me a little bit more about the fine line between, do you ask the question that needs to be asked, or when do you stop? And tell me about how you feel about that.
I think, and it's funny, funny is not the right word. It's terrible. But today I know, 15 to 20 people been wrongfully convicted. And so I've talked to so many of them. And I feel like the way I navigate it is you get a feel for the person and who they are. And you definitely get a feel for how open they are or how reserved they are and how comfortable they are. And so I make sure I only ask questions that I feel they would be comfortable asking. And I also always preface it with, if I ask you anything you don't want to answer, you can feel free to tell me to shut up. If if I ask you anything you just don't want to answer, you're absolutely just allowed to tell me that you don't want to answer it. So I always say those things first, saying like, only share what you're willing to share, what you want to share. And if I say anything that comes across insensitive or inappropriate, or that you just don't want to share, you're more than welcome to tell me in any which way possible,
Right.
to get out of here.
Yeah.
And that's worked really well for me. It's funny, I've always had this innate ability where I meet people, strangers on airplanes, that just tell me their life stories just immediately. And so it's been like that my entire life.
Right.
And so that has served me really well in this career, because people do tend to open up for whatever reason, which has been really, really nice when I talk to them, because I'm also someone who hates small talk. I just hate small talk. I just want to get into it and really get to know somebody. And so doing these types of interviews, obviously you're talking about, real life experiences and serious topics, and people really do open up, and I really appreciate it. I really appreciate like the level of trust that they'll have in sharing these things.
Yeah, me too. I don't like the superficial chit chat. I just don't know how to do it.
I don't know how to
like
do it
the
either.
deep. Yeah. I like to go deep and really understand, and I'm so curious about people's lives, and I'm the one that sometimes people feel like I'm interrogating them because I'm one question after the next session, because I'm curious, and I'd be curious about their stories too. Is there like I mean, you're saying that you really sense whether they're open or not to asking questions. Do you feel like sometimes we need to know the details, or do you think that sometimes we don't, and maybe the details are too much?
Yes, I do. I don't think we always need to know the details. I think you always have to respect what it is the person wants to share and is comfortable sharing. And that's the limit of the details that we need. The funny thing is, when I switched to filmmaking, the reason I didn't make a pitch deck or a sizzle reel and try and sell the film is because I was really aware that most of true crime that's on TV right now on streaming platforms is quite sensationalized. And I did not want to have any part of that. I didn't want to make a story sensationalized. I didn't want to use crime scene footage. I didn't want to, Angela's family is very private. They've asked Jeff that they want to be private, and I didn't want to re-traumatize them either. I'm aware that any attention on her case would be traumatizing for them because they have voiced that they feel that way to Jeff. I have never spoken to them. So I was aware of that, and I didn't want to have any part in sensationalizing a true crime story. And so that's why I made the entire film first, the way I wanted it to be told, without any of those details, and then took it to sell it, because I didn't want somebody to muddy that up and say, oh no, let's, show the dead person. Let's this, let's that. I didn't want to get into that. And it's not what I wanted my name on, So I definitely think we don't need the details for everything. And with Jeff, he was always great. He told me, you can ask me almost anything. There was, literally, I think one thing he said was off limits, which I never asked him about. I personally chose, not that he said this, but I personally chose not to ask him about any assaults, because I just felt that might be re-traumatizing to have to relive that by explaining it to me and telling me those stories. As it was just a personal choice I made, and that's where I felt we didn't need those details. We know that he was horrifically treated in prison as a child, and that's enough.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is, because I've seen some true crime shows, and sometimes those details, they linger in your head forever. And then you keep thinking about it. And there's a part that it's like you want to know, and then you don't want to know, because it just keeps in your head and it's hard to get it out. And
yes.
I can't even imagine for the person that has to live that every day. But also the respect of, you're right. Does somebody need to revisit every little thing that happened to them? And that's a vulnerable thing to share, like to the world, that now everybody that sees your face knows exactly what happened to you. I think that there's a fine line between, yes, I was abused, but do you need to know every graphic detail of my abuse? I don't know.
Yeah, that's what I think we don't. You know, unless for some reason that person feels that they need to share it, then they can.
Yeah.
But yeah, absolutely, we don't. It's like when people see a car accident, everybody slows down and everybody starts looking at it. And it's like, you can't look away from it because it's this crazy thing that you don't normally see. But would you have been better off just not seeing the car accident altogether? Yeah, of course you would have been.
Right,
You know?
right.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
But it doesn't diminish the story. You still need to hear the story and still need to understand that, we have a system that still is not the best and we still have a lot of work to do,
Yes.
You put it on Amazon. Could you walk us a little bit through the process of that? How did you get it on Amazon? Was it hard?
It was quite hard. And you know what's so funny about this? It was during COVID when I finished the short.
You had a lot of time.
I had a lot of time, yes, and time was on my side. But I was really devastated because my film, it was my first film I'd ever made, first time changing careers into this, thinking I was going to change careers into this. And when it got into its very first film festival, I was so excited. It was one film festival. And then it got into 2, 3, and 4 film festivals very quickly. And the very first screening with the premiere of the film was going to be at the Anthology Film Archives here in the Lower East Side in New York. And I can't even tell you how excited I was. I was like, this does not happen. This is a once in a lifetime thing that you make your first film and it's going to screen at the Anthology Film Archives in Manhattan. I mean, I was like, I'm living a dream right now. That's how I felt. And then 2 weeks before that screening, and Jeff was so excited to see the film for the first time on the big screen and everything. And 2 weeks before the date of the screening, COVID happened. Everything got shut down slowly. One theater was like, we're going to postpone the screening because we have to close. We're not sure what's happening. Second theater, we're going to postpone. 6 months went by. A few of them said, we're just going to cancel because we don't know what's happening. A year went by. All of the screenings got canceled. And I was feeling so bad for myself. I was like, what luck that less than 1% of films get into film festivals. And so for me, I was like, I was in that 1% and now it just got taken away. I was feeling really, really down about it. And, being very type A, like I was saying, I was like, what can I do? And at the time, what was really fascinating is so many people in the film industry were all sitting at home, bored, and started doing all these Zooms and masterclasses online. And they were all over film groups that we're in. And like, Rami, the show.
Yeah.
Yeah, he did once. He's just at home with like 12 of us on Zoom. And so I got to talk to him. And it was just all people from all walks of life within the film industry were doing these, and you could just have one-on-one conversation with people you would never have access to otherwise. And it was because of COVID that we were able to do that, because they were just also sitting at home and they're like, what am I going to do? May as well do this, right? Which was really nice for the creative community. So over a course of a few months, I took 50 of these. I got on 50 Zoom calls.
Wow.
No joke. 50 of them. I was doing them like morning, afternoon. I was like, I'm going to fill my time. And so I was just taking notes and like figuring out, how do I get a film out onto a streaming platform? And there is like no real clear path to it, which is also bizarre in the industry. I've found there's agents that are legitimate agents. There's agents that are scam artists, and you can end up paying someone and realize that that's not what you were supposed to do. And so it's a tough thing to navigate as a new filmmaker. And so to be able to talk to these established people on these Zooms really helped me. And on one of them, somebody said, Amazon has a portal for indie filmmakers where you can submit it yourself. And I had started an Excel sheet and lists after lists of distributors, agents, trying to figure out who's legit, who's not. I was in film groups talking to people. Has anyone worked with this company? Has anyone worked with this company? Like, is this someone I should give my film to or not? And I could not figure it out, like who was good, who was bad. And then somebody on one of these calls mentioned this Amazon portal. And so I looked into that, signed up for that account, and submitted it myself directly to Amazon. And sure enough, a few months later, they picked it up, and then I got an air date for the film. And I was shocked, completely shocked. And the timing of it was just amazing. A year later, they shut down that whole portal and said they're no longer doing this and no longer allowing filmmakers to submit directly. And now you do have to go through an agent. And so there was this little window where I learned of this thing, and it was open, and I submitted, and they took it. And
wow.
Yeah.
That is so great.
It's so great. And for other filmmakers, I will say this. A year later, when they took it down, they also took down 90% of the films that people had submitted that they had actually put up on Amazon. And
Wow.
mine did not get taken down. Mine got to stay up. And I will share why for anyone else who ever tries this. When I was doing talks, I did a lot of talks at a lot of high schools, colleges, for law students about the film. We would screen the film and then do a talk, and Jeff and I would do the talk. I always asked them to review the film. And the reviews, because we have so many positive reviews, is why they didn't take our film down. And so I can't emphasize that enough for filmmakers to really, ask friends, family, when you do screenings anywhere, for people to review the films, because otherwise mine would have been taken down too, and it wouldn't live anywhere right now today.
Right. Well, I guess that A-type personality is paying off. You are just really good. You just, whatever you touch seems to turn to gold. I mean,
that hasn't always been the case. With this, I will say Jeff's story is so compelling.
Yes.
Right? And he's and he's such a great interview, and he's just done so much such positive things with his life. So I feel like if you just tell his story right, it's gonna tells itself.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Yeah.
Well, in closing, I just want to comment that you co-host a podcast with John Gully.
Yeah.
Speaking of crime, from a true crime series. What made you want to pursue podcasting? I'm always curious, how do you find your people?
The stories that we tell?
Yes.
Yes. So I had no desire to go into podcasting. And when Conviction released on Amazon, I started doing interviews, like press interviews, to kind of get the word out for the film. And I interviewed on the Speaking of Crime podcast. And I interviewed with the two guys that were on the podcast at the time, the two co-hosts. At the end of that interview, later that evening, I got a Facebook DM, and it said, "Hey, I know you're busy and probably don't have the time, but would you like to join us and host the podcast with us?" And I was like, "Guys, I know nothing about podcasting." They're like, "You don't have to. We know everything about podcasting. You can just do the interviews. You can just do interviews like you do on your documentaries." And I was like, "Oh, well, this is a no-brainer. It's the same genre. It's another way for me to get the word out about my film. I love doing interviews, love talking to people." And so I just said yes, knowing absolutely nothing. And as time went on, it started to really grow, because we changed the format of it. It used to be an interview podcast. We changed it to an audio documentary, and now each season tells one story. And so it's very much like a film, except for it's audio only. And I really started to love it, because it takes years to make one film, and with a podcast, we can do it in weeks. And so we can tell a lot more stories, which I loved being able to share. I get approached all the time by people in my email inbox, can you help us? Can you share our story? The podcast is a way that we can do that. I can't make a film about everybody, and it costs so much money. So I love it. It's great. It's a great medium to share other people's stories in a much quicker way. You can produce it much quicker. And as far as how we find the stories, originally all I did was research online. The first story we told was actually Gabby Petito's story before it blew up. And at the time, there was, I think, 8-9 people missing in the Moab area at the same time. So we thought, is there a serial killer? Something is weird here, because there's so we told all of their stories. Gabby was just one of many people who were missing at the same time in that area. That was our first season. The second season, I was literally just thinking, now what do we do? The season's done, and I don't know. I've never done a podcast before. And so I Googled stories, and I came across the story of Praveen Varughese, and I was just fascinated by his story, because, like you mentioned earlier, his killer got to walk free. So it was the opposite problem with the justice system. Yeah. And so I thought that was something interesting to shed light on, where it can go wrong, but the other way. And so that was a fascinating story, and the family is just wonderful. So yeah, it's just usually one leads to the next. And if we don't have one, then I just do a little bit of research and see what seems interesting and what would be interesting to our listeners.
So what's on the horizon? Any future plans of more movies or?
Yes. So what's funny is, now that I just finished the feature film, I'm looking for the next story now. And so my goal is to tell the story of someone who's currently wrongfully incarcerated. So hopefully we can actually help them a little bit, rather than somebody who's already freed. But I do just want to continue to make films about wrongful convictions. It has been tough to find somebody, which seems crazy. But there's so much red tape. A lot of lawyers don't want journalists and filmmakers coming in and getting into their business because they have a strategy for how they plan to get this person out. So it's been a real challenge, which I would not have envisioned because I thought there's so many people who are wrongfully convicted that this would be an area where I would be able to help them, and to not be able to find someone quickly to help has been a little frustrating, to be honest.
Wow, that's interesting. Well, yeah, it's like anytime you want to do some good work, sometimes there's always these barriers to it,
Yes. But I'm hoping in the next month or two here, we'll find a story and then can start filming the next one.
Oh, good. Well, I can't wait to keep up to date on what you're doing next. And thank you so much for being on the show today.
Oh, thank you for having me, Tammy. It was a wonderful conversation.
Thank you so much for listening. I encourage you to get out there and make a film. Reach out to your local filmmakers group to get involved and connect. Please subscribe to the show if you like it, and follow me on Instagram @TammyMcGarrow. Until we meet again, what's your story?